I'm going to show you that it is possible to make proper furniture out of construction lumber as I build this coffee table, but stick around because there is one big reason why you shouldn't. I'm going to get started by rough cutting these 2x12s with a circular saw, but why 2x12s? The first thing you need to do is select your lumber. This one looks great. The long and short of it is that you want to avoid buying simple 2x4s and buy the largest dimensional lumber that you can. The reason is knots.
Oh, I'm not.
When they harvest trees for smaller dimensional lumber, they grab the tiniest stick they can poop a 2x4 out of, like this tree here, because the young ones are cheap. Kinda like me. But as you can see, there are branches coming out of every end, and each one of those represents a knot that'll make your project look more like a barrel sauna. If they need to saw something larger, like a long 2x12, then they need to start with a much bigger tree. These trees have fewer knots and imperfections because their branches are all the way up there. The lumber industry wants to maximize its profits by skimping on the drying process. What this means for you is that those 2x12s you bought are still too wet to use. If you try to use any wood that's not properly dry, your flat farmhouse tabletop will end up looking like a barrel sauna. In an ideal situation, you would hit your head. In an ideal situation, you would allow your wood to dry out. Like these boards I've had sitting in my crawl space for a month now. But if you don't have that much time to wait, I'm going to give you some tips along the way to help minimize the inevitable wood movement. If you do have the time and you want to be extra sure your lumber is ready to use, you can use an inexpensive moisture meter like this pinless one that I have. The exact number doesn't mean diddly squat, but just compare it with known dry wood of the same species in your shop and it'll be good to go. It's also good practice to always buy a little extra and build up a stockpile of wood so you have some dry material available when you need it. Just don't turn into this guy.
Never thought of myself as a hoarder, but I'm hoarding.
I just thought of something. Before I rough cut this, I want to share with you the secret to getting the best cuts out of your 2x material. You're going to find two different cuts of wood within construction lumber, or in other words, how the board was sawn from the log. The first is called flat sawn, and the dead giveaway here is that you can trace a growth ring that enters and exits on the same side of the board. The second is what I've dubbed crap sawn, and it's sort of similar to flat sawn, except you get this nasty thing in the middle here called the pith, which is the center of the tree. The downside with flat sawn is that the board tends to cup over time, and this can even happen when the board is properly dry with construction lumber. The downside with crap sawn is that it's incredibly unstable and can warp and twist in unpredictable ways, and it can even split along the pith on its own accord. So you might be saying to yourself, they both sound undesirable, which one should I choose? And I would say neither, and both. Let me explain by finally showing you how I'm going to lay out and cut my parts for the project. Any part that I'm going to see only one face in the finished project, I'm going to cut out from the edges of the crap sawn board, like the aprons for my table. Avoiding the pith in the center of the board leaves me with a very stable and straight grain cut called vertical grain. Side note, if this were a hardwood like oak, this would be called quarter sawn. Any part that I'm going to see more than one face in the final project, I'm going to cut out from the edges of the flat sawn board. This results in what's called rift sawn and is equally as stable as vertical grain, but you get all four sides with nice straight grain, which is great for the legs of my table. You get this effect because the grain travels diagonally through the part. This is yet another reason why these wide boards are better. Construction lumber is typically used for banging together houses, but if you have any aspirations for making furniture at all, no matter what wood you're using, a planer certainly wouldn't hurt. If you don't have a joiner, no big deal. I won't be using my jointer for this project since it's not really set up to use yet. Also, I want to show you that you actually don't need a joiner to get straight and flat boards. Don't be afraid of this monstrosity. I rocked a lunchbox planer for years and I'd actually still have one, but my delicate ears got tired of the wailing. All you need to flatten your 2x material is a planer sled. This is nothing fancy, it's just a piece of MDF that's as wide as my planer and it has a little cleat thing on the end so the boards don't fall off. And you will need some wedges as well so you can level out the board and a little pink glue gun to tack things down temporarily. I was hoping this wouldn't happen. This right here is a pitch pocket, and it's an aspect of working with softwoods and construction lumber that I really don't like because it's sticky and gross. A pitch pocket is a little void filled up with gummed up tree sap, and it's caused by growth ring separation when a tree got injured somehow. Through the kiln drying process, the sap hardens a little bit, but it's not super solid, and it can mess up your saw blades, and it can even drip out over time. This is one of the slats that makes up the bottom shelf of my coffee table, and I can hide this defect by simply placing it on the underside where no one will see it, but I don't want to risk potential dripping, so I'm going to remove it, and I'm going to do that by continuously brushing it with isopropyl alcohol and wiping it away. Denatured alcohol will also work well, but I can't get it in Canada because apparently we can't be trusted with pure ethanol. Construction lumber is softwood, spruce, pine, or fir to be exact. And because softwoods are generally soft, it means that your completed piece of furniture will show signs of wear sooner than hardwood furniture would, unless you're like my nana and collect figurines and china and things. Some styles of furniture do not age well, and some do. And for the ones that do, imperfections will add what the HGTV people call character. Remaining in the realm of farmhouse, rustic modern, or even shaker style will ensure that your project will look good for years to come. I'm building something more in the mid-century modern realm because this is what my friend wanted. So I let him know about how quickly this will show wear and tear. So do as I say, not as I do. I'm going to be using dowels for the joinery in this build, but if you don't have a dowel, you can just use your domino instead. I'm obviously being facetious, but I know that because you're interested in using construction lumber for your projects, I'm just going to throw this out there and say you most likely don't own any fancy pants joinery tools like a fancy pants domino or a fancy pants panta router. Yes, there's the traditional mortise and tenon, but unless you have some fancy machinery to cut that for you, or you're one of those romantics who likes pure hand tools, then this is probably not going to happen. Besides the Venn diagram for people who build furniture out of construction lumber versus the people who build with mortise and tenons looks something like this. The more natural tendency for constructing furniture with 2x material is to use pocket screws. Pocket screws are easy to use and can be suitably strong in certain instances. However, I'm a little weary of the long-term performance of pocket screws in standalone furniture. I'm not talking plywood built-in cabinet construction here. Pocket screws are great for that. It's just that there is a better option that's just as easy as pocket screws and almost as strong as a mortise and tenon, and that's dowels. All you need is an inexpensive jig, the right size drill bit, and a collar, and you're good to go. The only trick with dowels is that you want to use the largest you can and as many as you can in each joint. One of the bigger nuisances of working with construction lumber is that it's a softwood, but it's not just any softwood, it's pretty dang soft softwood. And the problem with this is that you can accidentally dent your project just by looking at it. I've done this already a few times, and I'm trying to combat this by working on an old doormat, which is pretty soft. The other issue is that you can accidentally dent it when gluing up with clamps. Even if the clamps have little pads on them, they can still leave impressions if you put too much pressure on them. You can also use parallel clamps, but the ones I have are big and heavy, and they're just too much for this little table. So I am gluing on clamping blocks with CA glue and green painter's tape to combat this. When people start building furniture, they might head to the Big Orange store, load up on 2x4s, and then wander over to aisle 7 to pick up the finest, most lavish can of American walnut stain. I get it. People generally don't like the look of a natural finish on spruce, pine, or fir, and I can't say I blame them. You might be tempted to pick up whatever wood stain in the paint section of the big box store, but those run-of-the-mill oil-based stains can result in a blotchy look, particularly in construction lumber. Instead, I recommend using a gel stain. Keep in mind, stains don't add protection, so you'll still need to add a protective finish after altering the color. The first step to success has already been taken care of when we carefully cut out the vertical and rift-sawn sections from the construction lumber while avoiding the knots. The knots are a problem area for splotching, and flat-sawn grain tends to leave telltale cathedral patterns that are exaggerated by dark stain. The only trick with gel stains is work on one surface at a time and move quickly to wipe off the excess. This stuff dries fast and can show overlapping areas if you're too slow. After waiting for 3 days, I'm going to apply 3 coats of General Finishes High Performance. I'll lightly scuff sand in between coats to knock down any nibs or high spots. Using a water-based finish over an oil-based stain can prevent smearing of the stain if applying by hand, but just make sure the oil stain is properly dry before applying. Remember that one big reason I mentioned why you shouldn't use construction lumber? Well, here it is: cost. We all know that construction lumber prices have been slightly astronomical over the past couple of years, but at the time I bought the lumber for this project, the price had come down to something slightly more reasonable. I'm going to use a price per volumetric measurement of dollars per board foot, so we're comparing apples to apples here. I paid $1.90 per board foot for the 2x12s. This is approximately 30% higher than it would have been in 2019, if you're curious. Here's the kicker. After avoiding all the defects and pith and whatnot, the smaller yield significantly increases the cost per volume. I'm not talking just offcuts here, I'm talking the imperfections that I didn't want in my final piece. By my best deduction, the yield was about 60% of the original lumber, which increases the cost to $3.17 per board foot. I know not everyone is as picky about knots and defects as I am, and others might find a clearer piece of lumber, but I sorted through the big stack of 2x12s and found the best I could. Not only is the cost way higher, but the amount of waste here is unnecessary, particularly because this construction lumber could have been used to build someone a home without so much waste removed. Now we're really approaching the price of the lesser expensive hardwoods or the premium softwoods. You won't find as much waste in these products because there'll be far less imperfections. Also, these furniture grade woods have not seen the price fluctuations that construction lumber has over the past 2 years, so their prices are even more attractive by comparison. Remember that load of wood you saw in my crawl space? That was a load of ash that I paid $1.35 per board foot for. Even without the decreased yield from the 2x material, it's still far less expensive. Now granted, I got a pretty good deal for that, but if you put your nose to the ground, there are plenty of good deals to be had. As a side note, I'm going to be building a sick workbench out of this, so get subscribed so you don't miss that. I know some of you may think you don't have access to anything else besides construction lumber, and while I can't verify better availability for all places on Earth, I can say that I grew up in a very isolated part of Canada that doesn't have a whole host of your typical hardwoods, but there were plenty of old men with antique sawmills cutting up local woods such as birch and tamarack who have no idea what the internet is. So you gotta get out there, find other woodworkers and sawmill operators, and start talking to them face to face. I know, gross. So it's wet, unstable, sticky, ugly, about as durable as a marshmallow, and it's expensive. Bye!